Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. If you are seeing me, that means you are tuned in to the second match in the Octo-Finals of the International Reparation Debate Competition for 2026. Just now, we saw Rollins Academy from the United Kingdom face off against Mergrove High School from Jamaica. Rollins Academy reigned victorious and will automatically advance to the quarterfinals of this competition. Two teams now vie to secure one of few remaining quarterfinal slots. Good morning again, ladies and gentlemen. I am Ravon Thomas Matthews, and of course, we would not have been here if it were not for some really important and amazing partners and sponsors. And so we'd like to take the opportunity to thank the University of the West Indies, the Center for Reparation Research, Dewey Press, Jade Limited, the University of Hull, and of course, our main partner, the Repair Campaign. You've just heard from me and who I am. This match will also be adjudicated by two other well-rounded and talented adjudicators. And at this point in time, I'd like to take the opportunity to ask them to introduce themselves, starting with Mr. Javan Downey.
Hello, guys. Good morning. As Ravan just said, the name is Javan Downey, and I am happy to be here to witness this, what I anticipate will be an exciting Octo-Finals match. Best of luck to both teams. Thank you.
Thank you, Javan. And of course, Mr. Kevin Kilburn.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. I'm more than happy to be here with you guys to judge this debate. I'm expecting that it's going to be very competitive. I'm expecting sharp arguments, and I look forward to hear what you guys have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There you have the charge from the judges. They are expecting an excellent debate. I am as well. And the two teams that will very likely provide for us that excellent debate are CV Bethel Senior High School from Bahamas and Hillview College from Trinidad and Tobago. At this point in time, I'd like to yield the floor to them and ask them to introduce themselves, starting with the team in proposition, CV Bethel Senior High School.
Good day, I'm Angel Perez and I'll be your first speaker.
Good day, my name is Jada Malker and I'll be your second speaker.
Good day, I'm Kenneth White and I'll be your third speaker.
All right, and of course the team in opposition for this match, Hillview College.
Good morning, I'm Haley Ramhak and I'll be your first speaker.
Morning, my name is Seth Mohammed and I'll be your second speaker. Good day, my name is John Chen and I'll be your third speaker.
All right, and there you have the debaters, ladies and gentlemen. Now, of course, all debates must be governed by a motion. And so the motion for this round reads, this House believes that Indigenous and Creole languages should be the primary medium of instruction in schools. Once more, this House believes that Indigenous and Creole languages should be the primary medium of instruction in schools. This debate will follow the Jade parliamentary format. At this point in the competition, these teams are experts at the Jade parliamentary format. But for the benefit of you, the viewing audience, and as a quick refresher, I'll run through it nonetheless. And so, first speakers from either team, you will have 7 minutes to present your case. Second speakers, you will have 6 minutes. The third and final speakers from each team will have 5 minutes to prove to us why they think their team has won the debate. The first and last minute of each speech, rather, the first 2 speeches are considered protected time. During protected time, no points of information will be allowed. Outside of protected time, points of information are not only allowed, we absolutely encourage and welcome them. Of course, there will be no points of information during the reply speeches. Now, unique to the Jade parliamentary debate format is something that we like to call the cross-examination period. And we'll have 2 periods of cross-examination, but don't worry about it. I'll tell you a little bit more about that exciting period of debate when we get to that part. All right, ladies and gentlemen, with all that said, it is my great honor to bring to order the second match In the Octo-Finals of this August competition, we do so by inviting the first speaker from CV Bethel Senior High School to take the stage. The floor is yours, Angel Pierce.
Imagine waking up one day to discover that the language your grandparents spoke, the language that carries generations of stories, wisdom, and history, no longer exists. Not because people chose to abandon it, but because institutions slowly replaced it until it disappeared from everyday life. The Cambridge Dictionary defines primary medium as the most important method used for a particular purpose. Moreover, indigenous language is a language that is native to a particular country, and instructions are the detailed information telling someone how to do or use something. The current education system in many post-colonial societies uses colonial languages such as English as the primary medium of instruction. Their structure originates from colonial rule, when European powers imposed their languages in schools while discouraging indigenous and Creole or other local languages at home. And they are required to learn and express complex ideas in a different language in the classroom. This is why the government urges this House to accept the proposal to use indigenous and Creole languages as the main way to teach in schools, as it enhances students' understanding and fosters cultural identity. Our first substantive is that native language improves academic performances. When children are taught in a language they do not speak at home, they face what educators call a double cognitive burden. They must first translate the language before they can even understand the subject being taught. According to research by UNESCO, 2.3 billion people do not have access to education in a language they understand. However, when students are given an opportunity to learn in their mother tongue, it enhances comprehension and learning outcomes. A well-known example comes from Calm Language Education Program in Cameroon, where students taught in their mother tongue performed 100% higher, as with the mother tongue-based multilingual education program in the Philippines, where students perform better across multiple subjects, including mathematics and English, compared to students only taught in a different language. Mr. Speaker, the logic is simple. When children understand the language of instruction, they understand the content. When students are taught in the native tongue, it transforms this double burden into a one-way road to success. Our second substantive is that Creole or indigenous languages can reduce the dropout rates in schools and ultimately save national resources. According to the World Bank, teaching students in an unfamiliar language is a major contributor to what they call learning poverty, where children attend school but fail to gain basic literacy skills. Evidence from sub-Saharan Africa shows that when students taught in a familiar language, they are 30% more likely to read with comprehension by the end of primary school. Additionally, in Mali, a large-scale bilingual education program found that students taught in their mother tongue were 5 times less likely to repeat a grade and 3 times less likely to drop out of school. When students constantly struggle to understand what is being taught, school begins to feel discouraging rather than empowering. And over time, some students lose confidence in their ability, even though the real issue is the language barrier, not their intelligence. As a result, more students repeat grades or eventually drop out of the education system altogether. This matters because grade repetition and dropout rates cost governments millions of dollars every year. So, by teaching students in indigenous and Creole languages, students are more excited to learn and stay in school. Mr. Speaker, language is not merely a tool for communication. It is the foundation of identity, culture, and belonging. When education systems operate exclusively in colonial or foreign languages, many students are forced to learn in a linguistic environment that is disconnected from their homes, communities, and cultural experiences. This creates a harmful dynamic where students struggle to see the connection of their identity to what is being taught. so they'd rather leave school. When the language of a classroom reflects the language of the community, education becomes something students recognize as their own, rather than something imposed from the outside. In Bolivia's 1994 education reform, they implanted the bilingual intercultural education, EIB, where they incorporated all 30 Bolivian indigenous languages. They began with 100 schools in the 1990s to almost 3,000 schools by the early 2000s and got higher graduation rates instantly. Research shows that students who receive early education in their mother tongue demonstrate higher classroom participation, are more confident, more engaged, and less likely to desert school. In conclusion, the survival of indigenous languages, the development of inclusive societies, and the strengthening of community all depend on education that speaks to the people in their own tongue. To ignore this is to let centuries of knowledge, culture, and wisdom vanish into silence. If schools refuse to teach in the language of the very communities they serve, academic and social inclusions will be stifled.
All right, thank you very much. That was the first speaker from Team CV Bethel High School, Angel Pierce. At this point in time, we invite the first speaker from Hillview College, Haley Ramara, to open this debate, rather for Team Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, members of the House, esteemed judges, and my worthy opponents, good afternoon. The proposition would like you to believe that we are selling the legacy of our ancestors for the language of our colonizers, framing standardized languages as nothing but a colonial disease. They hide behind a veil of idealism without accepting that our world has changed, where they present an idealism rooted in perhaps even reckless change. We, the opposition, propose practicality. We propose a way forward that allows our nation to flourish in the era of globalization without sacrificing its soul. We, the opposition, firmly believe that though Indigenous and Creole languages should be an integral part of the education system, they should not be the primary medium of instruction in schools. Before we proceed, let us define our key terms. The British Council defines primary medium of instruction as quite literally the main language used by the teacher to teach. And contrary to my opponent's belief, it is not about what you teach, but how you teach it. Primary doesn't mean erasure or loss of culture. Primary means the main, not only, language of instruction. Indigenous languages are the original languages of the region's first people, and Creole languages are the languages developed from mixing the European and African or indigenous languages during colonization. On the other hand, standardized languages refer to the formal languages used in education, government, and international communication. In the Caribbean, the most common is Standard English, which is the official language of 12 countries, while French, Dutch, and Spanish all take up 3 countries respectively. We believe that indigenous languages should be integrated to revive what some would be considered dying tongues. However, this does not negate the absolute, non-negotiable need for standardized languages as the structural foundation for our education. And let's be frank, independence and sovereignty require resources. Converting an entire educational system is not a matter of simply changing some signs on the wall. We're talking about systematically rewriting every curriculum from preschool to tertiary education in every Caribbean country. In the Caribbean, teaching is delivered through curricula, textbooks, classroom materials, and all carefully constructed around standardized languages. To rewrite the way we teach means to rewrite and change everything from teachers' notes to textbooks to entire curriculums. For example, to teach physics, calculus, or advanced geography in Creole requires high-quality textbooks that don't exist in the volume needed. We need experts in both scientific fields and the Creole language fields to produce high-quality textbook materials, further increasing the cost and demand for book writers. And translators just aren't enough. They require specialized knowledge in a region where educational budgets are already stretched thin, where schools lack basic infrastructure and digital access. Is it responsible to divert millions into linguistic overhaul that may take decades to perfect? We risk bankrupting our schools to achieve a symbolic victory while our students suffer the consequences. And most Indigenous and Creole languages are fundamentally oral traditions. While great efforts have been made to standardize some languages like Haitian Creole, this is not the case across the board. Many Indigenous languages lack the technical jargon required to teach advanced studies, especially for secondary and tertiary education. So why should we rush to implement a language as our primary medium for instruction if we inevitably fall back on standardized languages at higher levels? Additionally, by making Creole the primary medium for instruction, we risk creating a knowledge gap. We would be setting our students up for a shock if and when they transition to higher education or the global professional world where standard English remains the lingua franca. Furthermore, we must address the stability of our institutions. As we saw in 2010, when Bonner's status change, Papiamentu lost its official recognition for a time. Using Creole as a primary medium makes education a victim of politics. If a new government comes in and defunds it, an entire generation of students who learn Creole are left academically stranded. We also have to look at the delicate social fabric of our nations. Many of our countries depend on the area. Many of our countries are multilingual. Trinidad alone has a tapestry of French Creole, Patois, Hindustani, and English Creole. If we were to enforce this policy, which Creole do we choose? Enforcing this policy would cause schools to specialize in one Creole as a primary medium, depending on the area or what is spoken in the majority. And this segregates certain students who live in different areas or speak a different Creole. And this could limit inter-school interaction and the ability of students, citizens, to interact with their own country. This brings us to the elephant in the room, original exams. Due to our geography alone, we are isolated, segregated by the Caribbean Sea. Our institutions, like CXC, are what creates unity. As Margot Greenwood points out regarding the ABC Islands, even the slightest variation between Papiamentu and Papiamento has led to a lack of effective inter-island cooperation. If we can't standardize a regional exam because we're speaking a dozen different primary languages, aren't we just isolating the students from the world and isolating them from each other? Mr. Speaker, the proposition argues that this change is an act of taking back our culture. But should our culture truly come at the cost of our future generation? And all for what? To stand on some moral high ground or symbolic win? True empowerment isn't about the language we speak. It's about ensuring our citizens have the keys to every door of every room of the global house, a house that already discriminates just based on the color of our skin. We do not honor our ancestors by narrowing the horizons of our children. We honor them by raising a generation of global citizens who remain rooted in their culture and unrestricted in their reach. Let us not trade our world of opportunities for our window to the past. Thank you.
And thank you very much. That was, of course, the first opposition speaker from Hillview College, Haley. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point in time, we're going to go into that exciting period of cross-examination that I promised you. And so this segment will see the team asking and answering questions of each other. First, team opposition will pose their 3 questions to the team in proposition. Each question will last no more than 10 seconds, and only one person on the team who's asking the question may do so at any given point in time. Then, of course, the team in proposition will answer those questions. Each answer will last 45 seconds, and the entire team can chime in to provide a strong answer as long as it fits within that 45-second period. After the questions from opposition have been asked and answered, we will flip the arrangement and provide the same privilege to team proposition, who will pose their 3 questions. All right, ladies and gentlemen, the rules out of the way. Let us engage in this first period of cross-examination. We invite the first question from the team in opposition, Hillview College.
First question. If students are primarily educated in Creole or indigenous languages, How would they compete internationally where English, French, and Spanish dominate academia and business?
You said that students will not be able to compete internationally, but studies actually shows that this is wrong. Research in bilingual education shows the opposite. Linguistic Jim Cummings demonstrates that strong literacy in a first language actually accelerates second language learning. Students who master their native language first develop stronger grammar, reading skills, and critical thinking, which makes learning English faster and more efficient. We're not replacing global languages. We are strengthening the foundation needed to learn them.
And just because we are teaching in our native tongue don't mean that we're not learning the very English that we will need to go against in competition.
Okay, second question. If students are primarily educated in Creole or indigenous languages, yeah? Oh, sorry. In many societies, sorry about that. In many societies, fluency in international languages is linked to better job opportunities. Doesn't your policy risk limiting upward mobility for poorer students?
This actually isn't true. This still goes back to the first question that you asked about the diversity of our language. Like we said before, when you learn your native language more, it strengthens it strengthens the path that you take to learn a second language. It's easier. So even in the job setting, when you need English, you know English and your native language, you're actually more diverse instead of someone who only knows the English language.
And our final question. In many societies, fluency in international languages is linked to better... Sorry, apologies. Number two. How will you standardize Creole language if even standard English is not standardized, as the standards vary depending on the place in the world? Example, Trinidad and Tobago has their own standard English, British has their own standard English. So how do we standardize Creole if we can't standardize English?
What we're doing, we're not standardizing it, we're teaching it in the classrooms. We're showing our younger generation both our culture, our history, our identity. What was taking us from the colonializers, we're showing them our language, what we lost.
All right, thank you very much for that first half of our first cross-examination period. At this point in time, we invite Team CV Bethel Senior High School to pose their 3 questions to Hillview College.
French Creole is constantly used in an everyday conversation. Wouldn't using it in classrooms make lessons more relatable and easier to understand?
Sorry, could you repeat?
No. Since Creole is constantly used in everyday conversation, wouldn't using it in classrooms make lessons more relatable and easier to understand?
So the answer to this question is that we are talking about the primary medium for instruction, and we believe that the primary medium would be that facilitates the amount of education and academic jargon that is utilized during learning. Even though indigenous and Creole languages have been used to reinforce fundamental concepts at a lower level, they do need standardized languages at a higher level, which means that it should be the primary medium.
Again, just to emphasize what you said, the topic is about the primary medium of instruction. That is, to help them understand, is to use it additionally, but not primarily.
Do you believe that languages spoken daily by Caribbean people are incapable of expressing academic knowledge?
Hi, could you repeat the question, please? Sorry.
Do you believe that the language spoken daily by Caribbean people are incapable of expressing academic knowledge?
We are not saying that it's incapable. We are saying that currently the standardization requirement that it needs for higher education and specific technical jargon requires it to fall back on standardized languages that have been here for a long time and have the jargon required. For example, in standard English that we learn when we are teaching fundamental concept of like secondary to tertiary level education, we need to teach it in English because we have it in English. But that is not to undermine the necessity for Creole and indigenous languages.
In our first question we asked, is Creole languages constantly used in everyday conversations? You said that they understand that language. And if the goal of education is understanding, shouldn't the language of instruction be one that students actually understand?
Sorry, so sorry, could you repeat the kind of breaking up on?
And our first question, when we asked if Creole was a language that everybody understand inside that native, where the people were, you agreed with that. You said that they did understand. If the goal of education is to understand, shouldn't the language of instruction be the one that students actually understand?
We're talking about the primary medium of instruction. I know it sounds kind of repetitive, but at the end of the day, we have to rely on our topic. And what you're proposing, what you're saying is that Creole, to use Creole in the classroom is just not as acceptable. We are not saying that by any means.
We are saying that even though they have instances where Creole does increase the learning ability of a classroom, it also is known that students could learn more than one language, and it's beneficial to be bilingual or trilingual. You don't need to rely on one. So in that sense, we could use Creole to reinforce concepts, but again, the primary medium should be a standardized language.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that ends the first period of cross-examination. Thank you very much to both teams. Now we'd like to invite the second speaker from CV Bethel Senior High School to extend the debate for side proposition. The floor is yours, Jada Monker.
When we talk about reparations, people think we talk about money. But colonialism did not only steal wealth, it stole identity, culture, and language. If colonial education systems erased indigenous or Creole languages, then restoring them as the primary language of instruction is not far-fetched. It is simply justice. The leader of the opposition may pretend that indigenous or Creole instruction means students will not learn English or other international languages. But I beg the opposition to see that the motion does not ban global languages. Mr. Speaker, the opposition fails to realize that languages such as English, French, or Spanish can still be taught as a separate subject. Under this proposal, students can become bilingual or multilingual. The proposition is not removing global languages from education. We're simply changing the language used to teach concepts so that students understand them better. Native language education strengthens global competitiveness. Mr. Speaker, our third substantive highlights how teaching in indigenous or Creole languages can accelerate the learning of additional languages, which strengthens global competitiveness. Linguists refers to this as the cognitive scaffolding, a concept developed by Jim Cummings through the theory of calming underlying proficiency. This theory shows that the skills of children developed in their first language, such as grammar, reading comprehension, and critical thinking, transfer directly when learning a second language. Likewise, global education research from UNESCO shows that students who build strong literacy in their native language learn second languages faster and achieve higher long-term academic outcomes than students forced to learn exclusively in a foreign language from the start. Mr. Speaker, the logic is straightforward. Mastery of one language builds the intellectual foundation to master another. By strengthening students' understanding of their native grammar and literacy, we are not isolating them from the global languages like English or Spanish. We are equipping them with cognitive tools needed to learn these languages more effectively. Native language education is repertory justice for the people. Mr. Speaker, our fourth substantive recognized that using the Creoles and indigenous languages as the prime medium of instructions repair the harm done by our colonizers as outlined in the CARICOM 10-point plan. Education in native languages helps preserve these traditions while ensuring that students remain connected to their communities. Colonial powers use schools as instruments of assimilation, forcing students to abandon their mother languages in favor of the Maori, in favor of the European languages that are seen as civilized. A clear example can be seen with the Maori people of New Zealand. When Maori children were historically punished for speaking their native language in school, investigations by the Wataji tribunal later acknowledged that these colonial policies contributed to the severe decline of the Maori language and their excursion of the Maori cultural identity. By the mid-20th century, many Maori children could no longer speak their ancestral language, leaving only older generations as fluent speakers. Judges, this was not simply a change in communication. It was a cultural domination that stripped communities of identity, knowledge, and heritage. Another vivid example of this occurs with the Cherokee language in the United States, once spoken fluently by tens of thousands. Today, only a few hundred fluent speakers remain, and the number continues to decline each year. Historically, Cherokee children were placed in boarding schools where their native language was forbidden, replaced by English as the language of education. The result was a dramatic reduction in fluent speakers across generations. Repertory justice is about repairing the lasting harms caused by colonialism, and language suppression was one of those harms. Therefore, restoring indigenous or Creole languages as the prime medium of instruction in schools is a practical and meaningful way to repair that damage. If colonial systems use education to erase indigenous voices, then justice demands that modern education restore them. Mr. Speaker, languages are slipping past our fingertips like sand carried away by the wind, disappearing so quietly that we hardly notice until they are gone. However, this loss is not natural. It is often the direct result of colonial education systems that deliberately replace native languages with those of the colonizer. We urge this House to accept the motion because this debate is not simply about language. It is about access, equality, and whenever education systems should adapt to students or force students to struggle in systems that they were never designed for.
Thank you very much. That was the second speaker from the team in Proposition CV Bethel Senior High School. Thank you very much, Jada. And now, ladies and gentlemen, to extend the debate for the team in opposition, Hillview College, we invite their second speaker, Seth Mohammed.
All protocols observed. Good afternoon, everyone. Today, we stand firmly in our stance that Creole and Indigenous languages should not be the primary mediums of instruction in schools. To break down this intricate topic, I've decided to do a little self-cross-examination. We're going to ask a few questions: the who, what, where, why, and how, all of which my opponents have ignored. My colleague has already covered the who, what, and where in depth, so allow me to expand on the how and why. Before I begin, I must urge my opponents to recall the definition for medium of instruction. We are not saying by any means that we should eliminate Creole from their knowledge, from the syllabus. We are saying that they should not be taught using Creole. Now, let's look at the how Creole can be implemented as the primary medium of instruction and how ineffective and incredibly difficult this process is. We've mentioned to achieve this goal would mean changing the majority of our mediums, rewriting thousands of textbooks, retraining thousands of our teachers, and completely uprooting our CXC examination system, I might add, which is written in standard English. You cannot teach in Creole, or sorry, not that you can, you should not teach in Creole and then test in English. It is ineffective. And I must ask the question, which Creole language are you teaching in? Are you suggesting that we write individual syllabuses or syllabi for each country or each individual Creole language? Now, whether it's the Philippines, Trinidad or Tobago, or even the Bahamas, a change like this will cost millions. But instead of the government wasting those millions of dollars changing how we teach, we should be changing what we teach to include more history on Creole and Indigenous languages, as my opponent stated. I agree with you guys. We need to learn more, but not by using Creole as a medium of instruction, instead of just throwing students butt naked into the lion's den. Now, my opponents have mentioned the Philippines, so let's take a look.
Point of information, so
Declan. In 2012, they mandated the mother tongue-based education system, supporting 19 languages. The government would have you believe that this sounds incredible and this is an incredible feat. I guess you could say it is. However, the system failed miserably. According to World Bank data, 90.9% of 10-year-olds could not even read and understand a simple text despite years and years of mother tongue-based education. Is this success in the government's eyes? Now, a reason being that those languages represent 8% of the Philippines, more than 240 dialects. And this can be brought back to the Caribbean, as we also have numerous different dialects. How do we standardize these languages? And you have mentioned that, I believe you mentioned that we don't have to standardize, but we do, because you cannot test something that is not standardized. Because what are you testing? Continuing, this language gap created a learning gap in Philippines. As mentioned by Michael, the government spent roughly $50 million developing material, training teachers, and adjusting the curriculum. And for what? In 2025, the government repealed the policy. The 2026 budget for the Philippines actually showed that they spent hundreds of millions of dollars just in damage control by the same policies that the government would have you employ. This example is not the Caribbean. I acknowledge that. However, this is still a great example of how the implementation of this flawed policy leads to disaster. Additionally, Bolivia's 1994 reform did not replace Spanish with indigenous languages, as our opponents have stated, but used them only in earlier grades as a bridge before transitioning to Spanish. This is not using Creole as a primary medium of instruction, continuing on into primary and secondary school. This is just as an infant. And in fact, a majority of the policies that my opponents have mentioned use this same method. So naturally, I must ask myself, why? Why must we change the language which we learn? What are we really trying to achieve? And the answer, as my opponents have stated, is cultural preservation. We don't want to lose this important part of our history and our culture. We can't let it die with next generations. And on that point, I completely agree. Massa done erased enough already. But being taught in Creole is not the only way for us to maintain this aspect of our history and our culture. The proposition suggests that we adopt this myopic view of primary usage, but it shouldn't be either or, but a combination of spoken Creole and written standardized language, which is already very common. Now, I can relate to this topic personally because I also attended a primary school that insisted on us speaking proper language. When I went to Hillview, I was put in a new world with new languages that I didn't understand or didn't know how to speak. And yet my teachers who use standard English didn't teach me in Creole. I still picked it up. I still learned Creole from my friends. And this is how culture is spread, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Speaker, we must acknowledge that the children learn best in their mother tongue. I acknowledge the statistic according to UNESCO. This is true. But it is also true that these children are capable of learning multiple languages. And why shouldn't they start with a standardized language? The language that gives them the best chance of success in their future. Additionally, nowadays, children already understand far more standard English than they speak because they hear it in media, on YouTube, on TikTok, science. So why must it be primarily Creole? Why are we limiting these children? Not to mention that culture is a multifaceted gem which has colors reflecting in music and food. Now, in conclusion, to examine who, what, and where, why, and how of this policy, it becomes clear that while preserving our languages is important, making them the primary medium of instruction is absolutely not the solution. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Seth Mohammed from Hillview College. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to enter into the second period of cross-examination. The rules remain largely the same. The only difference is that this time we will invite proposition to pose their questions first. And to that end, we invite C.B. Bethel Senior High School to pose their first question.
Do you agree that language is a key part of cultural identity and heritage?
Yes, of course, language is a key part of our heritage, but this is not the topic that we are talking about. We are talking about the primary medium for instruction and education. And that medium should be governed by what gives our students the best chance of success and what allows them the highest level of education and quality of education.
Would you agree that colonialism harmed Caribbean societies not only through physical exploitation, but also through cultural and linguistic suppression?
Can you repeat the question, please? Sorry, can we pop a little bit?
Would you agree that colonialism harmed Caribbean societies not only through physical exploitation, but also through cultural and linguistic suppression?
This is the sad truth of this is our reality. It is true. Yes, it is very true. However, this doesn't change the fact that it is our reality. This is the world we live in today. We have to adapt to these changes. As the Caribbean does so excellently, we survive and we have to adapt to the standard English.
And the purpose is not if we have been wrong. We know we have been wrong. We know our culture has been erased. We are aware of that. We have faced that. Our ancestors has faced that. However, what we talk about today is in this new world, this era of globalization, what language do we move forward with to not only renew and preserve our culture, but also give our students a chance of success? We can't negate that fact.
If colonial education systems were designed to benefit colonizers rather than local populations, why should we continue prioritizing the same colonial languages in classrooms today?
Can you repeat? Sorry, you break up in the last part.
If colonial education systems were designed to benefit colonizers rather than local populations, why should we continue prioritizing the same colonial language in our classrooms today?
So we know that the language of the colonizer, or historically speaking, education was used as a tool of suppression. However, this has changed. We use education for social mobility and to achieve greater things. You can't just say that because of whatever happened or here or go, you can't be had to speak in this and we can't speak in standard English. If it is that we were debating right now and I was speaking in Trinidadian Creole, you might not understand what I'm saying, which is the reason why I had to ask you to repeat again, you know? So the same way that we say this, you can't negate that social mobility and education provides a tool for us to excel and to grow as people. So we can't just say that we're limiting ourselves just based on some symbolic win.
And all of that, I might add, despite colonial suppression and despite our deep colonial history.
Wow, ladies and gentlemen, the debate is at a fever pitch. At this point in time, we're going to allow a 1-minute break in the debate. This minute is so that the reply speakers can put the finishing touches on their speech. They will have...
We didn't ask for...
Of course, yes, indeed, indeed. This is the second period, and so opposition, you should indeed go ahead and ask your 3 questions. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
My first question would be, how do you propose using Creole as the medium for complex subjects requiring technical jargon without relying on standardized languages?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, no problem. How do you propose using Creole as the medium for complex subjects requiring technical jargon without relying on standardized languages?
We're using the primary medium, we're using Creole and native languages as a primary medium. We're using this as, we are using, because the multiple benefits that it has, we already know that it's going to benefit us greatly. So we're willing to take that step into evolving our learning system, and we're moving away from the English language on a whole thing.
So when we say this, we mean that we are trying to help, well, not help, we are trying to build up our country using stuff.
Using our own language, using our own things.
Now, already multiple systems in place, multiple places will already use this system already, so it's already effective. We already know that it's happening and it's worked before.
An example would be the common language.
Your next question, Hillview, that is 45-second elapsed.
Okay, our next question is, how do we implement Creole and Indigenous languages as the primary medium for instruction when countries have more than one Creole and Indigenous language? Are you suggesting that we choose a language?
You say that we should choose, we're not suggesting that you should choose a language. We're saying many countries already operate successfully with multilingual systems. Early education can occur in regional languages while national and international languages are introduced later. This phase model is recommended by UNESCO and has been implemented successfully in several education systems already. Diversity is not a problem to eliminate, it's a reality to manage intelligently.
And in Bolivia's 1994 education reform, they implanted the bilingual intercultural education, which I stated in my speech, where they incorporated all 30 Bolivian languages.
Cultural pride is important, but what about pragmatism? How practical is it to teach Creole when there's an economic cost? Millions in retraining teachers, reprinting textbooks, and revamping the entire education system.
You say that it's a very great cost, but the real cost is how much time the students have to actually repeat school and go back to school and waste national resources because they do not understand the colonialized language that's already being used. But the real cost is forcing students to learn a language they don't understand. According to my first speaker, the World Bank states that the government spent far more money than they would. The government spends far more money on children going back in schools because they do not understand the language being taught than they would if they teach native languages inside schools.
And as I stated in my speech, when students constantly struggle to understand what is being taught, schools begin to feel discouraging rather than empowering. And the most money that is being spent is the government when students have to repeat a grade.
And according to the World Bank language, barriers contribute significantly to grade repetition and school dropouts.
Okay.
All right. So now, ladies and gentlemen, we enter into that 1 minute period of break. Reply speakers, this is your last shot to prove to the judges why you have won this debate. Your 1 minute break starts now. All right, ladies and gentlemen. To conclude this debate for Team Opposition Hillview College, we invite their third and final speaker, John Chen. All right, ready when you are.
My apologies. All protocols observed. Honorable judges, we must look beyond the emotional weight of the motion and examine the actual landscape of Caribbean education. The central question of this debate is not whether our indigenous languages or Creole languages have value. We know they do, but whether making them the primary medium of instruction is a responsible path for a region that is a small player in a large interconnected world. We, the opposition, stand for a Caribbean that is both culturally rooted and globally dominant, a feat that cannot be achieved by limiting ourselves, and my colleagues here have proven today. Look at the giants of the East: India, China, Japan, and Korea. These nations are fiercely proud in their rich heritage and their ancient dialects. Yet they have mastered both of their standardized languages and the global lingua franca to become the architects of the modern world. Why should we, a region of small island states already battling both the currents of world events and our history, choose to intentionally handicap our youth by making a localized vernacular their primary medium of instruction? The proposition today speaks of empowerment, but their policy is one of isolation. Our Caribbean governments are already strapped for resources. To implement this notion, you will have to rewrite every textbook from physics to finance into languages that are primarily oral and lack the technical jargon and standardization needed for modern academia. We will be gambling our taxpayers' hard-earned dollars on astronomical expense just to translate what our children have already accessed for free in the global standard. The proposition stated earlier that this Creole is a stepping stone for other languages, but the topic here today is the main medium of instruction. And there is no guarantee that a student that is taught primarily in Creole will even learn the language. The proposition undermined their own argument. They say that Creole could be used as a stepping stone, but the topic here today is whether or not it should be used as a primary medium of instruction. They aren't synonymous. Furthermore, we must address the regional fragmentation that this was caused. If we move toward localized primary instruction, we shatter the dream of regional unity. How can we maintain a standard regionalism? She said, okay, if a student in Jamaica is taught in a different linguistic medium than a student in Trinidad or Bahamas, must we construct exams of each and every single Creole and indigenous language out there? And it does even include regionally. Even in its own nation, some countries have multiple Creole languages. But do you expect exams for every single Creole language, even multiple in a single nation? We will be effectively ending the movement of labor and intellect within our own CARICOM borders. Worse yet, we will be mechanizing a class divide. The wealthy will always ensure that their children master standard languages in private school, while the poor remain trapped below the linguistic ceiling. Honorable judges, in conclusion, primary instruction did not mean the erasure of our culture. We, as a region, already celebrate our Creole and our indigenous languages through our music, our homes, and our art. However, this celebration of our history should not extend to the medium of instruction in our school systems. We must adapt to the fact that the global landscape have evolved, and our education system must evolve with it. Mastery of the global standard is not a concession to the past, it is a strategic necessity for the future. We should let the child speak the language of their ancestors in the playground, but let them utilize the language of the world in the classroom. We do not want our children to just belong to the Caribbean. We want them to strive on a global scale, an achievement that is, unfortunately, not very accessible to Creole and indigenous languages. For the sake of the next generation, we must standardize our education. The reality is, no matter how sad, is that in a world full of giants that are making waves, the Caribbean has survived and continues to survive, not by retreating, but by adapting to the global standard. The opposition rests. Thank you.
And thank you very much. That was the third and final speaker from the team in opposition, Hillview, John Chen. Ladies and gentlemen, to conclude this debate, we invite CV Bethel Senior's final speaker, Kenneth Wright. Okay, I'll stop. All right. So while we wait just a moment for the third and final speaker of this debate, I'd like to just take the opportunity to remind the viewing audience what we have been debating so far. The motion before us reads, this House believes that Indigenous and Creole languages should be the primary medium of instruction in schools. The team in proposition, CV Bethel Senior High School, coming out of the Bahamas, going up against a team in opposition, Hillview College from Trinidad and Tobago. Of course, these two teams would have been competing throughout several rounds of competition. They are, in fact, at the Octo-Finals, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is absolutely no small feat. No small feat, rather. They would have debated so far in two intense rounds of competition. In the previous round, Hillview College secured one of the highest scoring points in that match. In fact, they were tied for the highest scoring points with 287 points. Yes, that was the highest score that was given out last round. And Hillview successfully gained that. CV Bethel, of course, also won their match, entering into this match on 272 points. But ladies and gentlemen, debate is by its very nature a competitive sport, and there are no guaranteed winners. And so the only way we will know who will win this match is when we hear from the third and final speaker. And to that end, ladies and gentlemen, I invite once more that speaker to take the stage. The floor is yours, Kenneth.
Mr. Speaker, many post-colonial education systems still rely on languages imposed during colonial rule, systems that were designed by European powers to suppress indigenous and Creole tongues. The consequences are clear. Students who speak local languages at home are forced to learn complex subjects in a foreign one. This creates unnecessary barriers to academic success and severs the link between education and cultural identity. Therefore, the House believes that Indigenous and Creole languages must become the primary medium of instruction in schools. The opposition wants us to uniform Creole languages, but Creole languages does not have to be uniform. We experience different colonial experiences and different colonizers with different trauma. I want to thank for saying that Native people understand things better in their Creole language. This directly shows my point that learning in a student's native language improves academic performance. When children are taught in a language they do not speak at home, they face what educators call a double cognitive burden. where they must translate the language before understanding the lesson itself. Instead of focusing on ideas, students are forced to struggle with words. This is evident in the Calm Language Education Program in Cameroon that shows when students are taught in their mother tongue, they perform better academically because they fully understand the concepts being taught. This proves that mother tongue education does not hold students back. It strengthens the very foundations of learning. Judges, when students learn in a language they truly understand, classrooms become places of clarity, confidence, and achievement. Your first speaker stated that teaching in indigenous languages is too costly, but research shows that students waste national resources by repeating grades because they cannot understand the colonizer's language used in teaching. On the other hand, education in native languages can significantly reduce dropout rates. When students are taught in a language they already understand, the classroom becomes a place of opportunity rather than confusion. Mr. Speaker, consider Bolivia's 1994 education reform. They implanted the bilingual intellectual education where they incorporate all 30 Bolivian indigenous languages. They began with 100 schools in the 1990s to almost 3,000 schools by the early 2000s and got higher graduation rates instantly. Judges, the lesson here is simple. Students do not drop out because they lack ability. They drop out because the system fails to meet them where they are. By teaching in Creole languages, we transform the schools from barriers into bridges, ensuring that education includes them. Your first speaker stated that individuals would not be able to compete in the global world with our system, but this is false. Finally, teaching in indigenous and Creole languages can strengthen both global competitiveness and cultural restoration. Linguistic Jim Cummings, who is common underlining proficiency theory, the opposition stated that teaching Creole inflicts harm. The opposition stated that teaching Creole is not acceptable. This directly shows the damage done by our colonizers and proves why we should teach indigenous languages. Restoring native languages in education helps. Restoring indigenous languages in education helps repair historical harm caused by colonial language suppression. Malarian children were punished for speaking their language, which contributed to its decline. Restoring indigenous and Creole languages in education therefore supports both educational success and cultural justice. If colonial education systems use schools as instruments of linguistic evasion, then modern education must become the instrument of linguistic restoration. What we have demonstrated today is simple. Colonialism suppressed these languages. That suppression caused lasting harm, and our policy directly repaired that harm while providing academic and cultural benefits for victims and the society at large. On that chain of logic, the side that actively repairs historical harm must win over the side that simply maintains the colonial status quo. Thank you.
And thank you very much. The judges have a decision to make as to which team will be automatically advancing to the quarterfinals of this competition. However, just before the judges go, a fun little thought experiment came to mind. I'd like to hear from all teams in their native Creole language how you would say, "Hi, that was a good match." And I'll start. Yo, the match that did hot.
Okay. So you can just go there. We was prepared for any other question except that, by the way. Good with it. Good job, Deba. Yeah.
Yeah. Respect. Thank you.
And Phoebe Bethel, how would you say, hey, that was a good match?
Oh, Marasek, that was a good match.
I ain't gonna lie.
All right. Thank you very much for indulging me. With that, ladies and gentlemen, the judges are going to excuse themselves to another space and return to you shortly with the results of this match.
Good afternoon, TV Bethel's Debate Club. Today's special is reparations. Why? Because true equality is impossible without accountability. Because what was taken must be restored. Because justice delayed is justice denied. Because time does not substitute for what's owed. Because we still face the effects of slavery every day. Because we want to bring justice to the table.
Your Honor, why we as former colonial bodies need to give them reparations?
Order, order! Prosecutor, plead your case.
Your Honor, we need reparations because we deserve them. The defendants are guilty of atrocious crimes, including indigenous genocide at an unfathomable scale, cultural erasure, and theft of our resources. And for what? To build their grand empires across the sea? This is why the question should not be whether or not we need reparations today. The question should be, why haven't we been given them sooner? Give me this.
Order, order! I've made my decision. I find the defendant guilty on all charges.
I'm Hilly Ramhara.
I'm John Chan.
I'm Shiva Bihari.
And I'm Seth Mohammed, team captain, and we thank you for your time.
The Center for Reparation Research is thrilled to launch this international reparation debate competition. This international reparation debate competition that we launched today for secondary schools is one of our most important projects. How do we engage youth on matters of reparatory justice? The change needed in the education system can only be advanced when the youth are engaged and their voices are heard.
Why is reparations so important in and for the Caribbean? Because time comes for justice for our ancestors. Time comes for the Caribbean to insist on the right to development, to be compensated for the violence against our ancestors. So outreach to the young people who have joined this movement is critical.
There is no mass movement that isn't a youth movement. And we certainly want reparations to be a mass movement. So it's really exciting, though, to have a regional stroke international debating competition. And I'm looking forward to your participation as you construct your arguments for and against, remembering that the 10-point plan for reparatory justice is our guiding framework for the areas in which we are demanding compensation, because we certainly want to impact the public opinion and awareness in Europe. So it's fantastic to have the United Kingdom participating as well.
So why is it important for youth to be involved in the reparation movement? Being involved in the reparations movement is critical to youth if one is to know their history so that they can understand why their societies are functioning as they are today. The future of the countries we live in are dependent on the current situation that exists today in our countries. And these current conditions were created by the past, including indigenous genocide, African enslavement, indentureship, and colonization. Being involved in reparations is about seeking justice, seeking a way to reduce inequalities in our own countries and then in the broader world. It's about seeking a more peaceful and balanced world, where global problems are solved in partnerships, not in isolation. I believe the sponsors are hoping this competition will allow our youth to gain knowledge about the past so that as young people, you'll be able to make better decisions in the future and make our countries better places.
We know that we need to understand stories about people that look like us. So the fact that so many of you young people have registered was so encouraged by your enthusiasm and your passion for wanting to enter this debate. It is so important. It's just at the core of who we are, that we need to understand where we come from, understand our true history, and having a debate competition on this particular topic is such an important milestone. To have a real conversation about repair, and the fact that our young people were so articulate with their presentations, and to ensure that we keep educating our young people, because you are the future of us and are the Caribbean's a sustainable future. So congratulations, everybody.
We are looking forward to the debate. Encourage everyone to join the debate. Thank you so much, all.
Education about the history of the oppression of a people can either be a tool for liberation or a tool for reinforcing trauma. What allows for education to be one or the other is not the topics taught, but how they are delivered. Therefore, we, the proposition, would like to firmly state that teaching the history of the transatlantic trafficking of enslaved Africans, or TTEA for short, does significantly more harm than good, not because of the topic, but because of the current pedagogical approach taken. Your average high schooler learns about the transatlantic trafficking in enslaved Africans through a rigid, standardized curriculum. They are taught by a teacher who is expected to simply deliver information, often in a lecture format, and test students on their ability to memorize facts, years, and names. In this setting, students are not invited to engage critically with the material, ask difficult questions, or relate the content to their own lived experiences. Instead, they passively receive a version of history unable to truly process its relevance, impact, or emotional weight. Where is the opportunity to understand how this horror shaped the blood in our veins and the names we carry? There's none. Students memorize facts and regurgitate them on paper. But inside, the lesson lingers, that the history of the African diaspora is one of subjugation, and that their place in the world is to suffer and survive, not to lead, not to thrive. This is exactly what Paulo Freire, in his work The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, described as the banking method of education, where students are treated as empty accounts to be filled by the teacher. Freire believed this model was fundamentally oppressive because it prevents learners from becoming active participants in their own liberation. It discourages dialogue, reflection, and consciousness raising. This is what he calls conscientization. The teaching of the transatlantic trafficking in enslaved Africans today in many classrooms still follows this harmful pattern. When this topic is taught in a banking method that assumes dichotomy between human beings and the world they live in, Freire says an individual is a spectator rather than a recreator. This kind of teaching doesn't empower, it conditions students to fit into a world shaped by oppression rather than resist it. And that is why we say it does more harm than good, because it teaches history in a way that keeps students passive, not engaged. We learn about Oladoye Ekiano, we learn his name, we learn that he experienced this and he wrote an account, but do we open the book and study it and analyze it and discuss it with our teachers the way that Israeli schools discuss Elie Wiesel's Night of the Holocaust? The opposition says they want students to learn about the slave trade and the enslavement of a people. And of course, we all want all students across the world to have reverence for this grave and absolutely horrific period of history. And we do this with the intention that learning about it can empower them to challenge the lingering legacies of racism and inequality. However, defending the status quo, which our opposition seeks to uphold and claims offers us more good than harm, will not offer us this. This is not remembrance. This is not reverence. And when you trace the system back to its roots, you realize that this is not our system at all. Accepted.
The fact that students today are not listening about the brutality, but also about the resistance, the rich civilizations before slavery, and the ongoing legacies, creating empowerment more than harm.
Right. Our issue is not with these topics being taught, but it is the way that they are taught and the way that they are emphasized with regards to all of the other things that are occurring within African history. To continue, our education system was inherited from Britain, a colonial power that had no interest in nurturing Caribbean identity or liberation. And what good can we expect from teaching this topic when we are continuing to do so in England's pedagogical approach? Even worse, as you mentioned, African history is taught in the Americas and Europe as though it began with slavery. From primary school, students are introduced to African people not through the glory of their kingdoms, their intellectual traditions, or their achievements, but through their chains. Why is it so hard for you to name a single black figure whose legacy is not defined by resistance or white oppression? Why is it that we teach about Toussaint and Nani but not Imhotep, Mansa Musa, or Queen Nzinga in the same breath? This should be taught first. And compare this to how the Holocaust is taught in Israeli. This is taken from the Israeli Ministry of Education.
Point of information.
Declined. Children are introduced to the brilliance of their culture first, their thinkers, their faith, and their resilience before they are taught about genocide. Their oppression is contextualized within a legacy of strength, not as the first chapter. If that isn't a pedagogical problem, then what is? When slavery is taught primarily as a story of powerlessness and victimization, with the current banking method of pedagogy, it does more than inform. It deeply affects the psychological development of students, particularly those of the African diaspora. During adolescence, a critical time for identity formation, as described in Erickson's theory of psychosocial development, students are particularly vulnerable to internalizing messages about their race and their place in history. If the dominant narratives they encounter emphasize subjugation or this constant need to fight without also highlighting pre-colonial civilizations and agency, students may inherit a sense of trauma and inferiority. Claude Steele and Joshua Aronson's 1995 concept of stereotype threat shows that students underperform when they fear confirming negative stereotypes about their group, a common experience for Black students navigating a curriculum saturated with ancestral suffering. In classrooms where Black students only encounter these narratives and are rarely offered examples of greatness before colonial times, they are more likely to fear confirming negative stereotypes about Black intellectual inferiority. And yes, this study found that this did significantly reduce their academic performance. In contrast, we argue for emancipatory pedagogy, which views students as active co-creators of knowledge and encourages reflection, dialogue, and transformation. We want students to read and discuss the first accounts, and this should be a mandatory part of the curriculum, not an option. Additionally, students should be first met with pre-colonial history that showcases the richness and strength of Africans from various tribes and kingdoms before delving into the horrors of the slave trade. Through student-centered dialogic approaches, this topic becomes not a detached narrative of victimhood, but a pathway to critical consciousness where students develop an internal locus of control, a sense of pride, and the tools to challenge injustice. When classrooms prioritize empathy, voice, and critical inquiry over memorization, the teaching of the TTEA can become what Freire calls a practice of freedom, not oppression. We are fully justified in arguing that teaching the history of the TTEA causes more harm than good on the basis of the heavily flawed pedagogy. In parliamentary debate, motions like this are evaluated based on the status quo, meaning how things are actually occurring now. As such, the opposition cannot shift the debate by suggesting that in some ideal future it could be taught differently or argue on the basis of the principle. We are debating the present, and the burden is to defend the way that it is taught now. Thank you.
All protocols observed, the opposition remains resolute against the motion. This House believes that the teaching of the trafficking of enslaved Africans causes more harm than good. We in the opposition agree that there are flaws in the method, but we argue that even in its current form, teaching this history does far more good than harm. We accept the definitions posited by the opposition with the exception of the word harm. Harm caused by the teaching of the trafficking of enslaved Africans in this case is more like temporary discomfort that fosters long-term justice awareness and healing. The proposition burden is to prove that the act of teaching this history is inherently harmful, even when taught well, and that these harms are so deep and widespread that they outweigh all educational and social benefits. We must prove that the current approach generates more harm than good, and 2, the harm is not inherent to the method but as a result of poor implementation, and 3, that the teaching of enslaved Africans creates civic awareness, empathy, prevention of recurrence, and general social progress. The status quo, the history of the transatlantic trafficking in enslaved Africans is already being taught, but with growing care and impact. Students today are learning not just about the brutality, but also the resistance, the rich civilizations before slavery, and the ongoing legacies of inequality. Yes, some schools get it wrong. Reform is being done for more inclusive, trauma-informed, and empowering education, making it the norm. Mr. Speaker, we are not for the current way of teaching this history. The motion didn't state the current way. We are for the best way of teaching this history. Allow me to rebut. And this best way is trauma-informed teaching. This would be training teachers to handle emotional topics with care, no graphic reenactment, use check-ins, and create safe spaces. This builds resilience instead of re-traumatizing students. And 2, balancing the story. Don't stop at brutality. Teach about African civilization, resistance leaders like Nani of the Maroons, and achievements of the African diaspora that restores pride and identity. 3, we would center real voices, use first-hand accounts, African scholars, and cultural sources to humanize the content and shift away from cold textbook trauma and link the past to the present, which will let students reflect through debate, which is already being done, and modern connections to racism and justice. This transforms discomfort into action and purpose, including Black educators. Involve Black voices in teaching is as authenticity, prevents tone deafness, and build trust. in diverse classrooms. This is credible as the RUN program has a similar approach, and it has proven to be working, as it has a 94% increase in the racial unity and empowerment. Allow me to rebut the misconceptions provided by the government. The government stated that teaching of trafficking of enslaved African causes discomfort and psychological harm. But let me say that discomfort is not harm, Mr. Speaker. And the 2019 UNESCO states that students taught slavery alongside resistance have greater empathy and understanding of justice. And secondly, discomfort is necessary for growth and historical reckoning, just like the Holocaust education or genocide studies. They also stated that the current method does not include the history before slavery. But Mr. Speaker, let me say that this is a big misconception. Most syllabi incorporates the history of the Africans before they were colonized. We don't learn about slavery before we learn about Mansa Musa. We don't learn about slavery before we learn about Songhai Empire. It is in the rationale also and syllabi that the teachers should use discussions to actually engage the students. In today's debate, I will bring two substantive. One, the current methods build civic awareness, empathy, and critical thinking. And two, discomfort from learning is not the same as harm. It leads to empowerment. My second speaker will discuss justice and the prevention of repetition in the injustice, while my third speaker will prove why we remain supreme. Our first substantive is the harm lies in the method, not the content. My first warrant is balanced teaching that includes stories of resistance and survival, reduces emotional harm and builds empathy. When we emphasize both suffering and human dignity in the trafficking of enslaved Africans by teaching resistance, African agency and survival, we shift from trauma to empowerment. It does more harm than good because it builds pride, resilience, and understanding. For example, the Holocaust education isn't taught by showing only images of death camps. They come with stories of resistance, survival, and moral courage. It fosters pride, empathy, and moral courage instead of guilt or division. That's why balanced, trauma-informed teaching benefits are supreme. My second warrant is effective, safe teaching already exists and work. We're seeing programs like Facing History and Ourselves offer concrete evidence that teaching hard history can be both emotionally and safe, intellectually enriching. According to a 2021 RUN Corporation study, students in these programs which is a reform program by the way, show that 94% increase in civic agency, meaning they felt more empowered to take social action and reported deeper empathy, stronger historical understanding, and more open-minded attitude. And the fact that we're seeing this in real classroom, Mr. Speaker, proves that harm is not inherent to the topic. It's about how we design the curriculum and support teachers, and we are currently doing this now through reform. If we have models that work, and we do, then the moral burden shifts to improving delivery, not erasing the content. What my third warrant is suppressing this history causes more harm than good. Mr. Speaker, be aware that we're not talking just about the current history. We're talking about the teaching of the history overall, because that's what the mood says. In environments where slavery is ignored or downplayed, misinformation spreads like wildfire. Students grow up believing that slavery was minor, that racism is just a mere relic of the past, or that systemic inequality is simply an overreaction. This ignorance sustains real-world harm, and contrary to this, we're seeing that countries like Germany, who have faced their history head-on with regards to the Holocaust, show lower levels of historical denialism and far-right extremism than those that whitewash. The impact, it promotes social equity and activism, because when students learn this history accurately and empathetically, they become more socially aware, engaged, and ready to challenge injustice. And two, it empowers empathetic, informed citizens who are empowered to fight modern injustice. And three, it protects future generations from repeating injustice itself. My second substantive is silence enables racism to thrive. My first warrant is when schools avoid teaching slavery, they leave students with distorted or incomplete narratives. In the absence of formal education, when students are left to piece together understanding from biased media, peer opinions, or online misinformation, the result is a deeply distorted view of race and history. A 2018 SPLC report showed that only 8% of the US high school seniors could identify slavery as the primary cause of the Civil War. When students believe that slavery was a voluntary arrangement or that racism ended in 1865, it undermines every effort to promote justice and equality today. Silence gives racism plausible deniability that it suggests falsely that if we don't talk about injustice, it must not exist. The impact, it ensures future generations, and with that, And with that, the proposition momentarily rests.
400 years ago. 400 years ago, my people were dragged from their homes, tribes, families, placed on floating wood, and shipped across the Atlantic to what will be later described as the most inhumane act of all time. Cold, dark, uncomfortable, cannot describe the trip in ships where whips did not fail to miss. Injustice, rape and disgrace, blood rains, brute, force, ignorance, hate in their veins. Sweat and tears, labor revealed, produce from king fields only for the esteemed. 400 years of eroding one's pride, culture, heritage, value. 400 years of the iron chain, stringing up, leaving bare. Oh, but they never cared. Why fight when you would be met with sharp blades? So don't you dare cry out in fear. Why not plan escape with the plaiting of one's hair? Oh, the drums, listen, dance, communicate. For tonight we fight a battle not even death could spare. Blue eyes, white skin, master said that's beauty within. But guess what? Black, brown, gold, royalty, reparations, we are owed. Them say hassa, but we say cassava. That's where we get the strength from to beat and conquer. For tonight, we're returning to Ghana. You may say, I'm a descendant of slaves because of the rich melanin that gushes from my pores. But I came to tell you tonight, I am not a slave. Rather the descendant of kings and queens. I am the embodiment of the divine. I do not chase, I align, I attract. What's meant for me already has my name on it. I am the personification of beauty, the expression of love, the creator of life, the acknowledgement of freedom. So go ahead, call me what you want, because when I die, bury me in the oceans where my ancestors jumped from the ships, because they knew death was better than bondage.
This is something that I wanted to discuss since Emancipation Day, but did you know that Britain only finished paying for slavery in 2015? Yes, 2015 as in 10 years ago. This fact was revealed in a since deleted tweet back on February 9, 2018 by the then Her Majesty's Treasury. In 1833, Britain borrowed 40% of its national budget, £20 million, to finance the Slavery Abolition Act. This act was the official end of British slavery and went into effect on August 1, 1834. The money that was borrowed was used to repay British slave masters for their quote-unquote loss of property. However, for the enslaved, there was no repayment and no form of compensation was offered. The amount that was borrowed, the £20 million, was equal to £2.2 billion in today's money. The since deleted tweet from Her Majesty's Treasury pointed out that the taxes paid by people today was used to repay the loan that paid the slave masters. This would mean that people from the Windrush generation and their descendants, people from Barbados, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, and other British colonies, would have helped to repay the loan taken out to pay the people who enslaved their ancestors. Using this video, I want to highlight that when people say that slavery was so long ago, 400 years ago, ancient history, and we should get over it, we can see that it wasn't that long ago. If we look at a timeline of the history of Barbados, we can see that chattel slavery in Barbados lasted 207 years, whereas the time from emancipation in 1834 to today is only 100.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, the judges are back and we have with us the decision and outcome of this match. So, this motion read, this House believes that Indigenous and Creole languages should be the keyword here, primary medium of instruction in schools. Both teams adequately identified that the key term primary is really what the debate turns on, whether or not this should be the primary way, the first way, the most impactful and forward way in which we teach individuals and students. Should it be our Creole and indigenous languages? We heard a few analyses come out from the debate. Angel tells us that, well, there's a real reason as to why we want to do this. The reason why we want to ensure that it is a primary way is because it produces better academic outcomes. Angel introduces to us this idea of a double cognitive burden. She tells us that inasmuch as native Creole languages is our native language, it is the primary way in which we speak. When we go into the school institutions and we teach a different language as a primary language, that adds two layers of cognitive burden. The first one is learning the content that you're teaching. The second one is learning the content that you're teaching in a language that you don't understand. So while you're trying to learn these really intense and complex ideas, you're also trying to learn the language in which they're being taught in. Angela tells us that it is bad. She tells us that this leads to great dropout rates, and she gives us examples of the Philippines, of institutions that did 100% better. Quite a large statistic, yes, a compelling statistic. There was a 100% increase or two times increase in the abilities of these individuals in the Philippines to get the knowledge that it is that they were trying to be taught when it is that they were being taught in their native and Creole language. Now, of course, this statistics is directly juxtaposed with Hillview's college statistics, where it says, I believe in that same Philippines, they tried this exact same thing and they ended up with like $100 million being spent to reverse the things that they just did. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know who's telling the truth, but someone is telling the more truth than the other. The judges were not sure, but the principle behind the analysis, we believe, held true. So even if we take that contradictory statistic and throw it out the window, the principle of Angel's case rings true, right? In as much as I have to be learning a language that is not my native and intuitive language, that is an additional burden that is going to be foisted upon me. And she tells us that that is not something that we should contend with. Haley tells us from Hillview College, well, here's the honest truth about the situation. This is going to be really difficult and really expensive. And Haley points out the things that perhaps Angel didn't want to point out, which is that you're going to need to revise the curriculum. You're going to be needing to give different textbooks and teachers' notes and all sorts of things and translate. And this is going to be like really difficult and really expensive, Haley tells us. So this motion, like all motions, gives something that we call proposition fiat, which is the general belief that in as much as we're debating something, it can be done. The question isn't whether we can do it, Haley is contending, very interesting, is the cost it will be. Now the question is, at that cost, is it worth it? So the cost is something that the judges buy and agree it is going to be logistically difficult and very expensive. The question then remains, is it worthwhile doing given these humongous logistics and financial considerations? Haley goes on to tell us, well, it's going to be particularly difficult to unify in as much as we have CXC. Now, this is where we get into the cross-examination, and it became a little bit more clear what the stances of the teams were, particularly coming out of the cross-examination. See, we understand from the cross-examination and for the speeches that came after, that C.B. Bethel is saying, well, what we need to do is ensure that we have the native Creole being taught in these regional pockets. Whatever your native Creole is, you will speak that Creole, and then you will learn English as a secondary language. We hear that this is quite fine. Jada Monker tells us, as a matter of fact, why this is good. She tells us that this idea of qualitative scaffolding, in as much as you've learned a particular language and that is your intuitive native language, the complex ideas and structures and thoughts and that kind of thing become really easy for you to apply to different languages. She tells us that inasmuch as I learn native Creole, that is my objective language, if it is taught primarily in the schools, I will be able to learn English as a secondary language quite easily. It will not be difficult. Now, when we look at this, we get the benefits of the learning in Creole, such as the academic outcomes, and then we get the idea that we get English as a secondary language, which is going to be, the judges contend, at least in spite of a direct opposition to the claim of the quality of English, yes, it is going to be sufficient for one to exist on the global stage. We find this compelling. We think that in status quo for other countries that do not have English as a primary language, they learn English as a secondary language and they're able to compete on the global stage. A la China, a la South Korea, a la all of these other countries that exist in the eastern side of the world who place a premium on the English language and are able to compete globally with that language. We think that learning English as a secondary language through the primary language of Creole is a legitimate and accessible way to approach this. Now, when we weigh the ideas coming out of the debate, we hear as well this idea of justice, that it is a reparatory justice thing, and we need to ensure that we do this because slavery was not just about extracting wealth, it was about cultural suppression, and that we need to have this be a method in which we get that sort of reparation. We weigh this idea against Hillview's beautiful concession of, yes, this is objectively a bad thing, but we don't necessarily need to have it be a primary language in order to get that adequate level of justice. Teach it in schools. Have it be a part of the curriculum. We think that's convincing. And so, ladies and gentlemen, the judges would have been delayed for quite some time, and we have the results. It is, ladies and gentlemen, a 4-point difference between the teams. I must say, a closely contested match. The team that won this match did so on 276 points, the team that did not win this match on 272 points. And so, ladies and gentlemen, when the judges weighed all of the analysis that came out of the debate, cross-examination, major substantives, minor substantives, intuitive assumptions, the judges would have concluded unanimously that the team that will win this match and automatically advance to the quarterfinals of this competition, standing amongst the top 8, is the school in proposition C.V. Bethel Senior High School. Congratulations, C.V. Bethel Senior High School. The judges think that your analysis of the academic outcomes, double cognitive burden, qualitative scaffolding, and all of these other analyses would have made it justifiable to move forward with this motion despite the significant cost that it would be. The best debater from this match actually comes to us from the non-advancing team, Hillview College. And that is Haley Ramarak.
Congratulations. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
It was a really, really good match.
It was a beautiful debate.
Yeah, definitely.
Indeed. Thank you very much. And so, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this second match in the Octo-Finals. Join us in just a few moments for the next match in this same round, where we will see Queen's Royal College face off against Convent of Mercy Academy Alpha. Queen's Royal from Trinidad and Tobago, Convent of Mercy Academy Alpha from Jamaica. The motion: this house believes that reparation entrench victimhood narratives. Until then, ladies and gentlemen, have a wonderful rest of your day.